Hello, people. I have finished a book, The Fatal Shore, subtitled The Epic of Australia's Founding. I'm hoping that the lawnmower out there is not showing up in this video. I don't know why anyone's cutting the lawn because we're a little bit droughty here in southeast Michigan. Uh, it took me a little while to read this book, not because it wasn't a good book. I really enjoyed the book, but it's 603 pages, which is, that's basically twice as long as a normal book. I would say, on average, books are about 300 pages. Uh, it was a really good book, but there's a lot more to the founding of Australia than what's in here. This focused primarily on the the penal colonies of Australia and how, year by year, how many convicts they sent there, what they sent them for, who was the governor at that time, who was the governor of New South Wales, who was the governor of Van Diemen's Land, is what they called it then. Later on, they start to call it Tasmania. Not a whole hell of a lot about New Zealand in here, which, I don't know, I kind of assumed that there would be something in there, but, New Zealand hardly ever gets mentioned. But that's what this is. It's meet the new governor. These are his policies. How does he punish the convicts? What happens to the convicts? Who are the convicts? Why are there so many convicts? Why is England so desperate to get rid of the convicts? Mostly, they had to get rid of them because they had no prison system. There was, population growth in the British Isles. Uh, they were trying to keep convicts on what they call hulks. Uh, they actually did that here during the Revolutionary War. They had hulks in New York. Hulks are old ships that are no longer seaworthy. They cut the masts off, they anchor them, and they cram 400 people on there so that they can all die of dysentery. Uh, it was a pretty good book. I learned a hell of a lot about Australia. There's a lot more to it, other things that I've previously read about exploration in Australia, the first people that tried to, like, cut across Australia through the desert. Uh, I don't know what book it was that I read that in, but I found that very interesting because I like the exploration stuff. So, this book was published in 1986, 603 pages. The author's name is Robert Hughes, and towards the end of the book, Robert Hughes begins to refer to Australia as ours and mine, so he must be an Australian. Get right to the reading here. Second paragraph, page 17. I don't think I have a whole lot of reading to do here. Oh, this is what I wanted to say. Uh, the book does not ignore the Aborigines. In fact, there's 2 or 3 chapters that are deal solely with the Aborigines. But I think it could have went into what happens to them a lot more. And I'm going to try to read this. I don't have any lights on in here. This is just the sun shining in the window. Second paragraph. Inside Newgate, one simply rotted away, staring through the bars, or as the phrase went, polishing the king's iron with your eyebrows. No work was done there. The central idea of the Victorian penitentiary, as proposed by Bentham and his Panopticon, and first tried in Philadelphia, that prison should be a place of isolation, discipline, and systematically graded punishment, alleviated by precise injections of hope, was quite new and untried in the reign of George III. It affected neither the way judges thought about the sentences, nor the manner in which prisons were run. The project of creating a captive society within the state, populated by convicts, fed and housed at public expense, and repaying an offended world, however nominally, with forced labor. In short, the idea of the penitentiary as it developed after 1820 would have struck the rules of Georgian England as utterly chimerical. Jails were simply lockups, and no one was improved by a spell in one. There were holes in which prisoners could be forgotten for a while. Their purpose was not reform, but terror and sublimation. But they were also meant to turn a profit. Just a little basic, the beginning of the book is all in England. Uh, they go into Cook. Captain Cook was the first guy to set foot in Australia. But no, he wasn't. There was a guy named Jans Zoon in 1606. Cook did it in 1770. And this one I knew when the Batavia was wrecked there on what would be the west coast of Australia. That was in 1628. And the survivors of the Batavia stranded two men on the coast of Australia, and that was in 1628. So those two men would have been the first white people to live in Australia. Page 83. I think I go a long ways without any reading here. Lots of little poems and songs and stuff in here, which, I don't know, I could have done without. 83. I'm having a hard time seeing here. I don't know why I got the last two. Oh, here we go. On the evening of January 19th, Sirius, which is a ship's name, and the transports sighted the coast of mainland Australia. By 10 the next morning, they were all anchored in Botany Bay. To see all the ships safe in their destined port, White wrote with commendable restraint, without ever having, by any accident, been 1 hour separated, and all the people in as good health as could be expected or hoped for, after so long a voyage, was a sight truly pleasing, and at which every heart must rejoice. It had been one of the great sea voyages in English history. Captain Arthur Phillip, the middle-aged nonentity, had brought them across more than 15,000 miles of ocean without losing a ship. The entire run had taken 252 days. A total of 48 people had died, 40 convicts, 5 convicts' children, 1 Marine's wife, 1 Marine's child, and a Marine. Given the rigors of the voyage and the primitive medical knowledge of the day, the crammed ships and the lack of anti-scorbutics, the poor planning and the bad equipment, it was a tiny death rate, a little over 3%. The sea had spared them. Now they must survive on the unknown land. That was the first shipment of convicts. And sorbutics, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. That's like oranges and shit. Shit with vitamin C in it. Page 85. And I'm not reading the whole paragraph. I gotta find that spot. Soon the Englishmen ran out of beads and ribbon, but the hesitant contacts went on through the afternoon as more tribesmen gathered on the beach. King gave 2 aborigines a taste of wine, which they spat out. Names for things were exchanged, but the great enigma for the aborigines was the sex of the whites. They poked at the Marines' breeches. Finally, King ordered one of his men to satisfy their curiosity. The embarrassed Marine fumbled at his fly, and the first white cock was flashed on an Australian beach. They made a great shout of admiration, King wrote. I don't know, I thought that was fun. That's supposed to be like the first time that they meet the Aborigines. And then I have Bligh written here. We all know who Captain Bligh is. Captain Bligh's open boat voyage was actually on the west coast of Australia. and he is appointed the governor of New South Wales for a little while. He wasn't real successful. I don't know, something about Bligh. People just didn't like him, and the his people, his lieutenants, everybody, they raised a mutiny against him. Not really a mutiny, but they did throw him into jail, and he had to be recalled. And I have Franklin written here. Franklin was the governor of Van Diemen's Land, which is Tasmania, and Franklin is Sir John Franklin of the expedition to find the Northwest Passage, where the Erebus and the Terror were both frozen in the ice. And I don't know, there was like 158 guys that died on that. They found evidence of cannibalism and everything. There's cannibalism in this book, too. Last two paragraphs, page 423. See, I jump all the way from page 85 to 423. And I think this is about the Aborigines from Tasmania. Bear with me here. 423. Jesus, fucking dog's barking. The last man died in 1869. His name was William Lane, and he was described as Trucanini's husband, although he was 23 years her junior. Realizing that his remains might have some value as a scientific specimen, rival agents of the Royal College of Surgeons in London and the Royal Society in Tasmania fought over his bones. A Dr. William Crowther, representing the Royal College of Surgeons, sneaked into the morgue, beheaded Lane's corpse, skinned the head, removed the skull, and slipped another skull from a white cadaver into the black skin. This gruesome ruse was soon unmasked, for when a medical officer picked the head up, the face turned round, and at the back of the head the bones were sticking out. In pique, the officials decided not to let the Royal College of Surgeons get the whole skeleton, so they chopped off the feet and hands from Lane's corpse and threw them away. The lopped, dishonored cadaver of the last tribesman was then officially buried, unofficially exhumed the next night, and dissected for its skeleton by representatives of the Royal Society. It was, one of them remarked with some understatement, a dirty job. Lane's skeleton then disappeared, and the head which Crowther consigned by sea to the Royal College of Surgeons vanished too. It seems that the ineffable doctor had packaged it in a sealskin, and before long the bundle stank so badly that it was tossed overboard. That was the last male Aborigine from Tasmania. His wife, Trucanini, wept and raged so inconsolably when she was told of the fate of Lane's body. She had long been frightened of death and of the evil spirit Rora, who would exact the revenge of the dead tribes she had betrayed. But now a further terror joined those. She begged the clergyman to make sure that when she died, she would be wrapped in a bag with a stone at her feet and dropped into the deepest part of the channel. I'm not going to try reading that word. Because I know that when I die, the Tasmanian Museum wants my body. By 1873, the last of her black companions were dead, and Trucanini was taken to Hobart, where she lingered on in a wretched aura of colonial celebrity, invented by the whites, as Queen of the Aborigines. One May evening in 1876, she was heard to scream, "Mrs. Rora, catch me! Rora, catch me!" A stroke felled her, and she lay in coma for 5 days. Her last words, as the dark peeled back for a moment from her terrified consciousness, were, "Don't let them cut me, but bury me behind the mountains." Of course, we know there's still Aborigines alive in Australia. The book never goes into these episodes where they steal their children and try to raise them in like a nunnery and shit like that. None of that is mentioned in here. I'm sure, I'm sure that the Aboriginal plight is worthy of an entire book. Uh, and then I have, of course, exploitations of natural resources. A lot of these convicts were put to work clearing land, timbering land. And there's a lot of talk in here about trees that are 15 feet around. You know, it was a gorgeous, untouched forest, much like what was here in North America. And when white people get around shit like that, they're a little bit greedy and they just see dollar signs, you know. So the same thing happened in Australia. Over and over, I run into that in this book. There's probably a little bit more left in Australia than there is here. In North America, there's like 0.3% old growth forest. Everything else is regrowth. And then this is what I have written on my second page. Torture, sodomy, alcoholism, greed, slavery, murder, ethnic cleansing, the rape of natural resources. There is page after page here about, you know, a clergyman is sent out to Australia to report on conditions there, and all they want to talk about is sodomy. And I mean, these governors who run these penal colonies just think of worse and worse ways to torture these people. Of course, there's flogging. Of course, there's hanging. But they also invent these bizarre ball gags that make you breathe through a little, like a hole the size of a pencil. They leave you strapped up to something, so you have to breathe through that for like 3 weeks. You can't even walk after they untie you, and it's just over and over. It just, this book pounds that into. Of course, the ethnic cleansing is the killing of the Aborigines, the slavery. You know, colonists went there who weren't convicts. They got assigned convicts to work their land for them. Greed, you know, chopping down the trees. They found gold at one point, and everybody just went crazy. Alcoholism. There was a group of business people that controlled the rum trade, and everybody was just fucking drunk all the time. They sent women convicts too, and you know, they were tortured, and they had multiple children out of wedlock, and a lot of these women were prostitutes to begin with. I don't know, that there's not much more I can say. You know, within 100 years, the population of free colonists outnumbered the convicts. They kept sending them. I was supposed to write down the total. It was only like 168,000 convicts total that were sent. But the author makes one point. You know, people talk about, you know, what makes somebody a criminal, what makes somebody evil. Is it nature or nurture? It's probably not nature, because a lot of Australians have convicts as in their bloodline. And Australia is not any worse for crime than anywhere else in the world. And I've also got murder written down there because some of the people in these penal colonies, there were places like Moreton Bay where if you committed a crime after they sent you, you know, you could work for settlers, but if you kept getting into trouble, you got sent to these other places, which were much, much worse. And I've got murder written down there because these places were so bad that these, you know, two convicts would get together and say, look, you kill me, and then they're going to hang you, and then we're both gone. So it was like almost a form of suicide. They would kill somebody. Pretty grim, most of the book, but I highly recommend this book. I'm interested in more, but, you know, the old thing is I buy my books at used bookstores, so I can't just order shit. This one does not have a price in it because this is one of the ones we got in Pinckney, Michigan at this book fair, and we bought a bag for $10, and as much as we could stuff in that bag, that's what we got. So I got a few more. I'm reading another one right now. The other one right now is not great. Thank you for watching.